Hi. Are we live right now? My apologies for interrupting.
Hi everybody, I'm Brock Lesnar, UFC fighter. I want to take this time to introduce to you my book that's coming out next year. It's a book about my life story, my fight to the top through WWE and the UFC, despite all the doubters and despite fighting through injuries and illness. I'm very excited about this book, and I'm going to work hard to sell this book, and I hope you guys do the same. And thank you very much for allowing me this time and opportunity to tell my story.
Hey guys, we got another good one today. We'll talk about Death Clutch, my story, determination, domination, and survival. We're talking about Brock Lesnar's story of that, which is his book that was published, I believe, back in if I'm not mistaken, back in 2000, and I want to say maybe, just during this time the UFC, it was about maybe, I want to say now 13 years ago, back in 2011. So salute to you guys at the Red Carpet Ring and Toss Ring Scandal, aka KDH. We are simulcast through both channels. We're here to talk about Brock Lesnar's audiobook. Now, a glimpse of this has been, I talked about this on the Toss Ring Scandal channel during his time in Japan, which he did wrestle for a bit, that he will explain in his book. So it's a lot that he'll explain. You know, you guys check it out. We're here live from both channels. So you guys get the lights as you come in. Brutally Honest Gilbert, salute to you. But enough of what I got to say. You guys are here for, he first was the next big thing when he first debuted. That was his name in the very beginning of his career. Then he became the beast incarnate as he is now, Brock Lesnar. You guys know. Other than that, we're going to get into that. And we'll talk more about that. So let's get into that. Let's talk about Brock Lesnar. Let's talk about his whole run to the top from the beginning of his life to how he got to WWE and later on UFC. So you guys enjoy the book. And as usual, it may be, as I say on Toss Ring Scandal, it's going to be some dirty laundry in here too as well. So tune in. And of course, this is part one. Part two will be disclosed later on. But like I said, let's enjoy the book. Enjoy.
Harper Audio presents Death Clutch, My Story of Determination, Domination, and Survival by Brock Lesnar with Paul Heyman. Read for you by Bob Dunsworth. Preface. Death Clutch. I was living with a dark cloud over my head for 17 months. I had gambled every bit of my reputation as a legitimate athlete, and I was determined to erase the stigma of being a WWE entertainer. All I had to do was smash Frank Mir into the ground. But I made a rookie mistake and got caught. These things happen in life, but I'm supposed to be better than that. I handed this guy, who will never be half the man I am, a victory he didn't deserve. So for 17 months, I waited. For 17 months, I imagined what would happen in the rematch. For 17 months, I couldn't wait to get my hands on this guy again and show him, my family, the world, and God, what I was capable of. When the wait was over, I did everything I intended on doing. I beat Frank Mir to a pulp, took him down to the ground, and smashed in his face so bad the referee had to stop the fight. I was not only the undisputed UFC Heavyweight Champion of the world, I'd gotten out from underneath that dark cloud that just wouldn't go away. I was so happy. I found my true calling. I was with the woman I love and am going to spend the rest of my life with. I was making millions. I had moved my parents close, bought them a home, given something back to my mom and dad. My wife had just given birth to our happy, healthy baby boy, Turk, Life wasn't just good, it was great. The best it had ever been. I was never happier. And then, I almost died. What the hell happened to me? I'm supposed to be hunting and fishing with my kids. I'm supposed to be rewarding my wife for all of her love and support. I'm supposed to be kicking ass, ruling the MMA world, being the baddest dude on the planet. I'm not supposed to be stretched out, withering away, dying in some hospital in the middle of nowhere, surrounded by a bunch of doctors who can't determine how sick I am because they're waiting on a part for a CT machine to arrive. Even without a proper diagnosis, they want to cut me open and take out half my intestines, force me to retire, and wear a colostomy bag for the rest of my life. It's amazing what goes through a man's mind when he's in clutches of death. Part 1. Raised to be a champion. Raised to be a champion. I want you to understand something. It's real simple. I owe it all to my mom and dad. Who I am, what I am, where I am. Parents put a lot of pressure on their kids to succeed in sports, whether they mean to or not. Some kids can handle the pressure and live up to their parents' expectations. Other kids can't, and they fail. It wasn't like I was being given a choice. I had to win. I was born with the talent and the athleticism. Those were God-given gifts. But a lot of talented athletes go nowhere. What made me different? More than anything else, my mom and dad, and the rest of my family for the matter, were willing to make sacrifices for me. There's a lot of people who helped mold me into a champion, but my mom and dad deserve the credit first, before anyone else. I didn't grow up with a silver spoon in my mouth. I didn't grow up like a lot of people think I did, as a spoiled athlete who got his ass kissed all the way through school and was catered to and coddled. I grew up poor, on a dairy farm in South Dakota, and I had to work for everything I have. A lot of my friends were not allowed to play any sports or participate in other after-school activities. They were farmers, and farm chores came first. We were farmers too, but my mom and dad let me start wrestling when I was only 5 years old. I milked cows and shoveled manure like everyone else, but I never missed a wrestling practice. My parents got me into every wrestling tournament they could because they wanted me to learn what it was like to compete. As far back as I can remember, weekends meant wrestling tournaments. I can picture myself in the back of the family car for hours on end, watching the farm fields go by and wondering where we would end up. It wasn't unusual for me to wrestle in a tournament in South Dakota one weekend, North Dakota the next, and in Minnesota the week after that. Take a look at a map. Those states cover a lot of miles. My mom did most of the driving to every practice, match, and tournament, because my dad had to stay home and work the farm with my 2 older brothers. Her job was to get me there. Mine was to win. My mom didn't accept any excuses. If I lost, it was my fault. Period. I couldn't blame the loss on the judges, and there were no teammates to let me down. It was just me and the other kid on the mat. One winner, one loser. The outcome was up to me, and me alone. When I lost a match, as I did from time to time, it was, admit it, accept it, get in the car, and let's go home. My mom's comments were always brief, and she always said the same thing. There's another match next weekend. If you don't like the way you feel when you lose, then get in there and win. What do you want to be in life? The guy who feels good because he wins, or the guy who feels like you do now because he lost? My mom was pretty stiff, but it turned out to be the best thing for me. It may seem cold-hearted, but she loved me enough to make me want to go out there and earn victories. Just like crying was not acceptable if I lost, there was no big celebration if I won. Instead, my mom would just say, "Good job, Brock. Now let's get in the car and go home. You won. That's what you're supposed to do." It was no different when I got back home and saw my dad. If I came home with a trophy, he would say, "Good job." If I lost, he would tell me to try harder and win the next time. That was it. The expectations were clear. Losing was not an option. Looking back from where I am now, I wouldn't have had it any other way. Wrestling is a competition. So is life. Back then, even as a young child, I walked into every tournament for one reason: to win. My mom and dad expected no less, and they taught me to never settle for second best. I haven't. I will never forget how upset my mom was when I lost in the quarterfinals of the National Junior College Wrestling Tournament. It was during my freshman year at Bismarck, North Dakota State College. She really wanted me to be somebody, to stand out. She wanted me not only to live up to my potential, but to do even more. She knew I had been blessed with certain gifts as an athlete, and that I had the ability to push myself harder than anyone else. So why wasn't I number one? In her mind, there was no reason I shouldn't be the best, and she wasn't ever going to let me think second place was okay. Sure, my mom pushed me hard to win. She saw a passion in me. She saw that I was a competitor. She wanted me to make the most of my natural instincts and be somebody. I was her last son. I was the third of 4 children, and I feel bad for my siblings because I got all of the attention. My 2 older brothers weren't as motivated to succeed as me, and over time, they lost their own identities. They became known as Brock's brothers. My poor little sister, Brandy, was a very good athlete in her own right, and she excelled at basketball, volleyball, track, and any other sport she decided to play. But no matter how well she did, she still had to live in the shadow of her big brother, Brock. I won't lie, being the center of attention had its perks. But it wasn't all good. I felt the pressure to succeed, too. What set me apart is that I always rose to the challenge. I didn't buckle under the pressure. At a very young age, I developed an inner confidence that I still have today. I don't know if it's ego, attitude, arrogance, or something else, but whatever it is, it works for me. I think my self-confidence is why, for as long as I can remember, I've been the backbone of my family. I am comfortable being the go-to guy, the one people depend on, the one in control. It's always been that way for me. I still try to take care of my mom and dad, and I will always try to make sure the rest of my family is taken care of. That's just who I am. It's up to me, and I look out for the people I love. At the same time, I know my limitations. I know I'm not perfect. I know what I know, but more importantly, I know what I don't know. When I don't know something, I surround myself with people I can trust to teach me. How many times have you seen an athlete who is his own worst enemy? He can't leave his ego at the door when he walks into the gym or onto the playing field. Nobody can tell him anything. I never had that problem. Every coach I've ever had, from kindergarten to college to my current MMA coaching team, will agree. I am coachable. I know to this day that it's so important to have the right coaches around you. A great athlete needs coaches that can see mistakes, work on imperfections, point out what sometimes is the obvious, and motivate. Athletes are too close to the competition and don't always see things that a coach may see clear as day. I've been very fortunate to have had great coaches, from my youth and high school coach John Shiley to my college and professional coach Marty Morgan. Those two in particular deserve a lot of credit. The same way my mom made sure that I learned from my mistakes, the nature of the sport of wrestling really brought that lesson home. In wrestling, you can win a tournament one day, and the very next day you might be taken down in the practice room by a B-squatter or a guy who is at the weight below you. That's why wrestling is such a humbling sport, and why it reinforced the same lessons my mom kept teaching me over and over again. Every day with my parents, and in the gym, was a constant reminder. I'm not perfect. I can always make a mistake. One mistake is all it takes. One simple, stupid, momentary lapse, like the mental mistake I made in my UFC debut against Frank Mir, is all it takes to go from champion to loser. As soon as you start to think you're too good, that you just can't slip up, someone will always be there to show you the error of your ways. Wrestling with my future. But I had my mom and dad, and they were behind me all the way. If it weren't for their belief in me and the sacrifices they made, you would not be listening to this audiobook. They are my biggest fans, and I am theirs. Farming is the life I enjoy, and the one I look forward to most when my fighting career is over. But I farm now because I choose to, not because it's all I know. I'm not stuck on my farm. I want to be here, but it wasn't always that way. When I was a junior in high school, I wanted a future that included something more than milking cows and sitting on tractors. It just happened that as I was thinking about how to get off the farm, a National Guard recruiter showed up at my school. My dad was in the Guard, so I didn't think he'd mind if I signed up. As a matter of fact, I didn't even ask him. I had my mom co-sign for me. Here I was, 17 years old, on my way to Fort Leonard Wood, Missouri. Let me say this for the record, so that everyone who is hearing this audiobook can understand something. The 9 weeks I spent in the National Guard that summer changed my life. I came back home a totally different person, and all for the better. The only problem was that I went into the Guard to drive tanks. That's what I wanted to do. But after an eye test, I was assigned to clerical duty. Can you see me sitting at a computer screen all day? That isn't what I signed up to do, and it wasn't in my nature. Lucky for me, the Guard let me return to high school for my senior year. During Guard training, we had to run every morning, which helped me nail a 2-mile run in 10 minutes, 56 seconds. When I went back to high school for my senior year, I was in great shape, and I joined the football team to be with my friends. I wanted to run the ball. I had the speed, and I was getting some size. But just as I was starting to rack up some impressive numbers, a defensive back took my knee out, and I had to have knee surgery. That was the end of my high school football career, and what turned out to be the start of my true competitive wrestling career. High school wrestling starts when the football season ends. That meant that my knee wouldn't be completely healed before the first day of wrestling practice. In fact, when wrestling started, I was still on my crutches. That was bad enough. But to make matters worse, every year since I was in 6th grade, our coach, John Shiley, made us do a 6-mile run on the first day of practice. It was called a gut check, and everyone was expected to finish if they wanted to be on Shiley's team. This was my senior year, and I was a leader. I wasn't about to let anyone say I didn't have the guts, and I wasn't going to ask for any special favors. So I did the 6 miles on crutches. It wasn't pretty, but I finished. Believe it or not, I was a late developer. As a young kid, I certainly was no heavyweight. I was a string bean. In 7th grade, I wrestled at 103 pounds. As a freshman in high school, I was a 152-pounder. Sophomore year, I was 160. By my junior year, I was 189 pounds. Finally, as a senior, I made it to the heavyweight division, but only by a couple of pounds. Looking at me now, it might be hard to believe that I didn't even have hair in my armpits when I graduated from high school. I guarantee you, I was the last guy to go through puberty in my class. I lifted a lot of weights, and I lifted a lot of weights. And even though I was a 6-foot-tall, 210-pound senior, I still looked like nothing more than a big, stretched-out kid. Even in my freshman year of college, at my heaviest, I was only 226 pounds. Coming up through the high school ranks, I was never a monster by any means. I was just trying to grow into my own skin. But that struggle became a huge positive for me when I had to wrestle as a 103-pounder or a 152-pounder. I developed the moves and quickness of a lighter weight wrestler. When I got to heavyweight, I still had those moves, and I was fast. Had I always been big, I probably would have skated by on strength and size alone, and I never would have learned to move like I do now. In both my junior and senior years in high school, I placed 3rd in the state tourney. But to me, that was nothing special. I was supposed to win. That's what I came to do. Even though I only played football in high school, because everyone else did, I was still pretty good at it. In my heart, though, I was a wrestler. Football was just something to do with my friends until the wrestling season started. I never thought of myself as a football player, even when I was exploding through the defensive line. I never for a minute thought I was going to play football in college or at the professional level. When I looked in the mirror, all I ever saw was a wrestler. That's probably why when things didn't work out for me with the Minnesota Vikings, I wasn't all that upset. Instead, in some ways, being the last man cut from the roster only confirmed something I'd always known. I can't hide the fact, and I really don't want to hide it. I'm proud to say it. I'm not a football player. I'm a fighter. It's what I do. It's my passion. It's my life. The cow chip recruit. It makes me laugh every time I read one of these articles about how I was a blue chip athlete and had my ass kissed by recruiters and scouts when I came out of high school. There was no college recruiting war for my services. No under-the-table money. No fancy cars. That's all bullshit. I placed third in the South Dakota State Wrestling Tournament. That didn't exactly put me on the national recruiting radar. One thing those articles fail to mention, and what a lot of people don't know about me, is that after high school, I didn't go straight to the University of Minnesota to wrestle at the NCAA Division I level. In fact, I wasn't recruited by any Division I schools, and I almost never made it to the U of M. Because the big schools were not recruiting me, and because I really wanted to continue wrestling, I started my college career at Bismarck State in North Dakota, a junior college. It was bad enough that I wasn't wrestling in a big-time program, but I only finished 5th at Junior College Nationals my first year. Even worse than the 5th place finish, though, is that I got beat by a pudgy little kid whose name I can't even remember, and neither can anyone else. The loss to that pudgy no-name was a major turning point in my life, because there was no way that kid should have been able to beat me. I looked at the guy who won the whole tourney, and I knew in my heart I could have beat him for the championship. That killed me. Because I never got the chance. The fat kid made sure of that. At that moment, I looked inside myself, and I got serious. I vowed to be the biggest, strongest, fastest, meanest SOB I could become. I wanted to put on pounds of muscle, train like my life depended on it, and just start crushing these fuckers. I knew I had it in me, and I was determined to grind through it in the weight room and on the mat every day for as long as it took, until I was on the top. I'm no quitter, and I wasn't going to finish my college career as a loser. After that first year at Bismarck State, I went home to Webster, South Dakota for the summer to work and make a little money. My mom and dad helped me as much as they could, but they were poor, and just keeping the farm going was draining them. I couldn't call home and ask my mom and dad to send me money. My mom and dad didn't have the money to give. They did what they could, but it wasn't like the kids I roomed with in the dorms. They had decent cars, cash for food, and money to go out. I didn't have any of that. When I went back to Webster for the summer break, I knew I had to find a job. My number one goal that summer was not only to make some money, but also to put on 25 to 30 pounds of muscle. I didn't want to be a powerlifting meathead guy, or those big goofy immobile guys who are obsessed about how big their arms look when they wear a t-shirt that's too tight. That just wasn't me. I wanted to be an athlete, strong, quick, and explosive. I have to tell you, it was a great summer. I worked as a laborer for the REA Power Company in Webster. Every day, I packed my own lunch and worked from 8 in the morning until 3 in the afternoon. Then I would go work out with my buddies, Jason Nolte and Troy Kennable. We just pounded the weights. I was determined to bulk up, but at the same time to be a better overall athlete. So I not only went after the weights like an animal, I stretched. Yeah, I stretched. I kept my body flexible and mobile. Every night we hit the gym at 5:30. No excuses. It was an obsession. Sometimes we'd drive to other gyms just to shake it up, keep it interesting, keep the blood flowing, but we never missed a day. I think that all of my drive, my passion to get bigger, faster, and better, comes from the mentality of being a wrestler. I'm not talking about a pro wrestler, although that requires enormous discipline and sacrifice as well. I'm talking about the lifestyle of an amateur wrestler. Amateur wrestling is not just a sport, it's a lifestyle. You breathe it like air. The lifestyle consumes you. As soon as you get up, your first thought is about the fuel you will put in your body. Then you hit the road and do some road work, because you want that blood flowing. You want to get that cardio where it needs to be. Always one more mile, one more step. You attack the weights like you're a man dying of thirst, and you're thinking that it will always take one more rep to bring some water up from the well. Then you go to bed, exhausted, and get some needed rest so you can get up and do it again day after day. Today's athlete is bigger, stronger, and faster than ever before. They train harder, and they train smarter. No longer can a guy rise to the top of any sport on talent alone. The winners are the ones who train right and are willing to sacrifice the most. The good news is that I had the passion, I was willing to listen to my coaches, and was always willing to work harder and longer than anyone who wants to take me on. My work that summer paid off. I went from 226 pounds to 258 pounds. I was flexible and I was fast. Before you can ask, and because everyone does, no, I was not on steroids. I put on muscle because I had great genetics. My dad and brothers are all big guys, and I ate a lot of beef and worked my ass off in the gym. All the time I was training, I kept thinking about the discipline I had learned in the National Guard and how important it was to follow through on my plans. I knew I could do it, and I did. As a matter of fact, before I went back to school, I believed that I could do anything I wanted in life. In my sophomore year at Bismarck State, I wrestled in the Daktronics Open at South Dakota State, and I beat two-time defending champion Brian Reisel. Next, I went to the Bison Open at North Dakota State University, and I steamrolled through the heavyweight tournament. That's where the University of Minnesota head coach Jay Robinson and his assistant coach Marty Morgan first saw me. The Bison was the first big tourney of the year, and a lot of the guys who went there had to work some of the rust off because they'd been out in their nice little cars and enjoying themselves all summer. Not me. I had been in the weight room and in the gym all summer, so I had no rust. I came in looking to hammer anyone that stepped on the mat with me. One of the star athletes for the U of M was a heavyweight named Shelton Benjamin. A two-time All-American for Minnesota, Shelton was a joke, and Jay wanted to build on Shelton's success and create a great heavyweight team. I was part of that plan. Next thing I knew, I was on a plane headed to Minneapolis on a recruiting trip. I remember my junior college coach telling me not to sign anything. But when I got to Minneapolis, it just felt like home. The U of M didn't waste any time, and I signed with them that day. I still had a full season of junior college wrestling ahead of me, but I knew what I wanted for myself, and I could see it happening. I went 36-0 that season and won the National Junior College Athletic Association Championship. Here's a bit of trivia for you. I was the last guy to ever wrestle for Bismarck State College. They shut down the wrestling program after my last year there. My sophomore year was over. I was the NJCAA champion, and I was headed for the big time to wrestle for the Gophers. Or so I thought. A detour on my road to the NCAA Heavyweight Championship. The U of M coaches, Marty and Jay, wanted me to move to Minneapolis right away when I finished junior college so I could start working out with their heavyweights like Billy Pierce and Shelton Benjamin. But as always, I didn't have any money and I couldn't afford a place in Minneapolis. That's where Alan Rice came in. He was a former Olympian and he was a huge Minnesota Gophers booster. He also happened to own a frat house on campus. Alan said there was an extra room in the attic and he would rent it to me for dirt cheap. Something like $100 a month. It sounded like a great deal to me. Let me tell you, if Rice would have charged me 20 cents a month for that flophouse attic, it still would have been too much. It was absolutely horrendous. When Rice said the room was in an attic, he wasn't kidding. This was not some bedroom above a frat house. It was really a fucking attic. I had pigeons up there. It was dusty. It was cramped. It was drafty. I was living in a fucking attic in Minnesota. To pay the rent for that frickin' place, and to get some money for food, I took a job with Gopher Construction as a demolition man. That was a perfect job for me. Every day from 7 a.m. until the middle of the afternoon, I demolished things with a sledgehammer. And when I was done swinging the 20-pounder, I still had time to make my afternoon workouts at the gym. Yeah, I was paying my dues, but I knew it would all be worth it. I was determined to win an NCAA Division I title, and I was willing to do whatever it takes to get there. The U of M was a program on the rise, and I was going to be its star. But then, the road took an unexpected turn. Just as I was settling into my routine, Jay Robinson called me and said there was a problem. They were trying to get me enrolled at the U for the fall, but my junior college transcript was 24 credits shy of the minimum for eligibility to transfer. Are you kidding me? I was pissed. All I could think was, you guys had all my transcripts and you saw what classes I was taking. I'm 19 years old. You're the wrestling coaches. This is something you should have seen right away. But there we were, sitting in Jay's office, and he's telling me I am 24 credits short. Unfucking believable. After all that I had been through, I wasn't about to just kiss my dream goodbye. I wasn't going to let the system beat me. I was going to take control of my own destiny. I knew summer sessions had started at schools everywhere, so I asked Jay if he knew anybody that could help. Jay said he knew a guy named Rex Branham, but there was a small catch. I'd be going to school in Susanville, California, and I wouldn't be able to knock out all 24 credits, but I could finish up 16 of them and then go to Bismarck State College in the fall for the rest. I thought it was a huge move going from the farm in South Dakota to the big city of Minneapolis, even if it is only a couple hundred miles away. But California? Jay might as well have told me I had to move to Japan. They were both a world away as far as I was concerned. I immediately went back to my attic in the frat house, grabbed all my stuff, and headed home to Webster. On the way, I was thinking about how to tell my parents that I wasn't a U of M Golden Gopher, and that I was heading out to California in 2 days. I never did think of a good way to deliver the news, so I just told my mom and dad straight out, I'm not eligible for college, and I need to get some quick credits at a school in California. They looked at me like I was nuts, but my mind was made up. If this is what I had to do to get on the U of M wrestling team, then this is what I would do. There was no discussion. I left home with Lassen Community College in Susanville, California, as my destination. I remember thinking this might actually be a really fun road trip. I wasn't even out of South Dakota when my 10-year-old Mazda RX-7 gave me some serious problems. I was cutting through an Indian reservation, and my muffler fell off. I was way out of my territory, so to speak, because the relationship between the farm community and the Indians on the reservation in South Dakota during that time period wasn't very good. Figuring that I wasn't going to get a lot of help from anyone, I drove off the road into a barbed wire fence and up onto a huge rock so I could get under the car to tie the muffler back up. I always had tools with me in my car, so I was able to cut some barbed wire off the fence and use it to tie my muffler up tight. That was enough to get me back on the road to California, but I had no idea what to expect when I got there. I didn't know anything about the school I was going to. I didn't know where I would stay. I didn't know how I would afford to eat or where I'd train. All I knew was I had a long drive to Susanville, and by the time I got there, I would be just in time for classes. I remember driving until I hit Salt Lake City, Utah, around 5 a.m. on a Sunday morning. I pulled into a truck stop and took a little nap, but I knew that if I didn't get my ass back on the road, I couldn't get my school credits, and without the credits, I couldn't get into the U of M wrestling program. How could Jay Robinson not have known I was 24 credits short? I finally got to Lassen Community College at 5:30 a.m. on Monday, the day classes started. I immediately tried to call the wrestling coach. Of course, no one answered. Only farm boys would be up at 5:30 in the morning. So I left a message and sat by a payphone just waiting for it to ring. I don't know if I was sleeping or half sleeping, but at around 7 a.m. the phone rings and it's Rex Branham. He says he'll meet me up at the school in a half hour. I was completely exhausted after the cross-country drive, but those damn credits were calling me. When I met with Rex, he asked if I had any relatives at all in the state of California. If I did, I could register as a resident. It just so happened I had an aunt in Fresno, so I used her address, and 16 credits were only going to cost me $160. This was still a lot of money to me, because when I got to California, I had exactly $480 in my pocket and nothing in the bank. I spent $160 on tuition, which left me with $320. I knew I was going to have to eat, so I put a $200 deposit down on the school food program. That got me breakfast, lunch, and dinner in the dining hall every day, and left me with $120 to spare. But that California school wasn't a great fit for me. I stood out in that place like a big infected sore thumb. I had my tuition and meals taken care of, but the whole adventure would be pretty pointless if I didn't pass my classes, and that is hard to do without any books. But if I would have paid for all the books I needed, I wouldn't have had any money left over for anything else. So I shared books with the other wrestlers. Sounds easy enough, but I really hated having to bum books off the guys all the time. Still, Susanville, California will always be a special place to me. I almost started my fighting career there. I found a little gym that had some weightlifting equipment and a mixed martial arts dojo. This was my first MMA training. One night, the guys at the gym were all going to Reno, Nevada for a fight. I called up Jay Robinson and let him know I was planning to fight in Reno to pick up a few bucks. He told me flat out that I would be jeopardizing my chances of becoming a D1 athlete if I did. That was all I needed to hear, and I didn't go. Had I gotten a taste of MMA fighting back then, who knows, maybe I would never have gone back to school. Someday I'd like to take my wife and kids to Susanville, just for the hell of it. Maybe even make the drive. Show my kids where I had to go, what I had to do, to just make it to the University of Minnesota. I'm not complaining. I'm glad I paid my dues and earned my own way. After my California summer, I just needed another 8 credits to get enrolled at the U of M. I called my U of M advisor and asked if he would help me make sure all my credits from California got transferred back to Bismarck State College. Then I drove from Lassen to Bismarck and started the fall semester at my old school. But BSC didn't have a wrestling program anymore, and I knew I had to do something to keep up my conditioning and skill level. I stayed in touch with Jay and Marty, and they gave me a workout program. Because I had no one to wrestle with at BSC, I drove out to the University of Mary, an NAIA, National Association of Intercollegiate Athletics, school just outside Bismarck, and practiced with their team every day. Being an overachiever, I took 12 credits that fall, even though I only needed 8. I wasn't taking any chances this time around. At BSC, I was living with my old friend Mike Eckert, who was my dorm neighbor the year before. Mike was really cool. Same old story. I didn't have any money at all, so Mike shared his room with me. It was just a pad we could crash in, but that was important to me because I had nowhere else to go. I'm just glad that I get this chance to tell everyone what Mike did for me that fall. I quickly fell into a routine at BSC. Weights in the morning, back-to-back classes, wrestling practice with the University of Mary team, homework. But every day, all I could think of is that I was one day closer to joining the U of M Golden Gopher wrestling team. I wanted that U of M singlet and all that went with it. I finished up the semester at BSC and passed all my classes. Then I left school 2 weeks early so I could get to Minneapolis before Christmas break, because I wanted to get ready for the next semester at the U of M. I also wanted to meet the guys, because I was going to be placed on the team immediately. When I got to Minneapolis, I moved in with Tim Hartung and Chad Kraft, and those guys really sacrificed for me. The U of M needed a big new heavyweight, so a lot of people went out of their way to help me out. Times were good, and I was headed in the right direction. I was finally living my dream. Then I had my first match and lost to Trent Heenick at the Omaha Open. Welcome to NCAA Division I. The mat in Omaha was small, and I kept going out of bounds. But there's no excuses here. I lost, and it burned my ass. Here I was, the guy who was telling everyone that I was going to be the NCAA Division I Heavyweight Champion. I was the focus of the team, the poster boy. I was supposed to be the star heavyweight, and here I was in my first match, and I lose. It was embarrassing as hell. I only lost twice that year, that first match and my last. In the NCAA Finals, I lost to Stephen Neal 3-2. Today, Neal plays right guard for Tom Brady in the New England Patriots, and he wears 2 Super Bowl rings. Back then, he was the returning NCAA heavyweight wrestling champion. I lost the match to Neal because I was a little bit hesitant. It was a lesson for me. Never give an opponent too much respect. I believe to this day that if I had just come at Neal full throttle, I would have won the 1999 NCAA Finals. But I did learn from my mistake. I had so much respect for Neil, Big Ten champion, defending NCAA champion, that it changed the way I approached the match. It took me off my game. I thought he was better than he really was. I thought about that 3-2 loss a lot, and I finally realized that I was never going to win the biggest prizes by showing that kind of respect to any opponent again. Not ever. If someone wants my respect, they better beat it out of me. That's the only way they'll get it. The loss to Neil made me think back to those tournaments when I was 5 years old, and how disappointed my mom was if I lost a match. I hated to let her down, and I hated the feeling that comes with losing. I was embarrassed when I lost my first big-time college match to Trent Heenick. But this was worse. I went through all this shit. California, back to BSC, borrowed books, borrowed wrestling partners at the University of Mary, just to get on the team at the University of Minnesota, and then I lose in the fucking finals. I hear all these people say, "It's such an honor to make it to the finals. You should feel privileged just to be able to compete at such a level." That's a lot of bullshit. I'm a competitor, and I learned from my mom when I was 5 years old that you compete to win. I'm either number one or I am a loser, and losing sucks. I hated losing to Neil. If you think I was consumed with getting that loss back from Frank Mir during my professional career, you should have seen me after I lost in the finals of the 1999 NCAA Division I Wrestling Championships. I had one more year to make my dreams come true, and at that moment, I made up my mind that I was going all the way. There wasn't a college wrestler on the planet who was going to stop me. Senior year. One last chance to go out on top. From the day I walked off the mat at the 1999 NCAA Finals, all I could think about was becoming the 2000 NCAA Heavyweight Champion. I went to class because I had to stay eligible to wrestle. But aside from that, every waking thought was on the big prize. If I ate something, it was to build me up so I could win the title. If I lifted a weight, it was with that ultimate goal in mind. If I stepped on the mat in practice, it was to win, and to win convincingly, regardless of the drill. Winning the heavyweight title wasn't the biggest thing on my mind. It was all I ever thought about. When I was throwing 280-pound heavyweights around the mat, the U of M wrestling program was getting some big publicity, and it was all centered around me. Here I was, tall, blonde, and chiseled, and I was tossing opponents like no one had ever seen before at the college level. The media ate it up, and we were packing the house for every match. People were coming to see me wrestle, and I enjoyed putting on a show for the fans. However, I really could have lived without the media attention. I actually began to hate it. I found out very quickly that I could manipulate a lot of people and create a lot of interest in upcoming matches based solely on the words that came out of my mouth. But it wasn't an act, it was just me. I was raised to speak my mind, and I did. If you look back, you can find a Minneapolis Star-Tribune story from 1999 that reported a comment I made about what I was going to do to Wes Hand, the Iowa Hawkeye heavyweight, and how the U of M was going to steamroll over Iowa. Just because I made that comment, we drew a sellout crowd. The university had never seen this kind of press for the wrestling team. Even back then, people came to see Brock Lesnar. Instead of just reporting about my wrestling career and maybe even how I might approach my next match, the media got to be really invasive. They asked too damn many questions. One day, I decided I had enough. I told Jay I wasn't going to cooperate with the press anymore. I just wanted to wrestle. Except when I was out there competing, I wanted the press to leave me the fuck alone. But instead of getting off my back, the media wanted to talk to me even more. To this day, the media coverage is the one part of fame that I really don't enjoy. I love being in front of the audience, but I've always hated the public relations bullshit. I try to limit media access and get some personal space. But when I do, it only makes them hungrier. They are like animals. If you feed them once, they always come back for another bite, and another, and another. That's why I learned very early on not to give them the whole meal at once. They will always come back, and I have to save something to feed them when they do. I went to summer school before my senior year at the university, but I also coached at Jay Robinson's wrestling camps to make a few bucks. I was about to start my senior year when word came down that there were now only 10 scholarships available for wrestling. 10 scholarships meant that if the program wanted to add more wrestlers, it would have to divide full scholarships into partials, or that some wrestlers would be on their own. There just weren't enough scholarships to go around. You guessed it. Next thing I know, I'm being told the university is cutting my scholarship so they can give it to another guy. I was really pissed. I'm bringing in fans and dollars to the program, but after 4 years of working my ass off, I am stuck with over $37,000 worth of student loans. That pissed me off almost as much as losing to Neil my junior year. The whole situation still chaps my ass. I was on my own again. This time, though, I was a senior, hampered by a couple of knee injuries, but I knew it was my big chance, because it was my first full year as a Division I wrestler. I just said, screw it, and went undefeated until a week before the Big Ten tournament at the end of the season. It was me against Wes Hand from the University of Iowa, and Wes had figured me out. He had watched me on tape and was fully prepared for the way I was going to come at him. I shot in on him, and he lateral dropped me right to my back. 15 seconds into the match, I was down 5-0. In Division I wrestling, that means you're hosed. I wasn't going down that way. Not to him, not to anyone. I kept saying to myself, "You're Brock Lesnar. No one does this to you." And I battled my way back. But he gets his roller skates on and just tries to stay away from me with his 5-point lead. I ended up coming back and scoring 4 straight points, but there just wasn't enough time, and Wes Hand beat me 5-4. I don't have to tell you that I was humiliated again. I wasn't 5 years old anymore, but my mom still chewed me out. She was big on tough love, and I deserved the ass chewing. When we went to Outback Steakhouse that night, I couldn't even finish my steak. I was sickened by the loss. I didn't have any excuse for losing. I thought to myself, no one should be able to beat me. I am better than that. I am better than Wes Hand. When I look back, though, that loss was the best thing that could have happened to me. It made me work harder than ever before, and it made me focus on the Big Ten tourney, which was the last important match before the NCAA championships. 2 weeks after my only loss, I won the Big Ten championship by beating Wes Hand in the final 2-1. For both me and Wes Hand, however, the biggest match of our lives was still a week away. 64 heavyweights, the best in the country, competing for the NCAA National Championship. If Hand and I could both get through our 32-man brackets, we were going to wrestle each other for the title. I couldn't wait. It was a long year since I had lost to Stephen Neal, and this was my last chance to become the NCAA Division I Heavyweight Champion. I wanted to win that title so bad. It was what I had gone through all this shit for. I came back all the way from defeat at the hands of Stephen Neal, and I was headed back into the finals. This was my chance for redemption, an opportunity to live my dream, a shot at attaining my goal. I couldn't sleep the night before we left for the NCAA tournament. The Mississippi River runs through campus, and I walked down to this spot where we used to do training runs. I can still remember the beautiful sky that night. I'm just a farm boy who loves to look up into the sky. I listened to the water rush by, and I watched the snow come down. My hair stood on end. As I stood there by the river, I said to myself, there isn't a man in the world that can stop me from standing on that podium as the NCAA Heavyweight Champion. Not Wes Hand, not anyone else they put in front of me. I'm coming home as the champion. That title is mine. And then, a sense of calm came over my body. I went home and slept like a baby. I got up the next day and we flew down to St. Louis, Missouri for my final matches as a college wrestler. Getting to the finals in my senior year was a bitch. I had lost in the finals the year before, and it was burning my ass every day. Plus, you know the old expression, everything that can go wrong will. I went through my entire senior year with a knee injury. I also had to have a salivary gland surgically removed from my neck during the season. I wasn't the wrestler that I could have been, but I was determined to be good enough to become the NCAA champion. 64 guys were invited to the NCAA tournament. After several matches, 62 were done, and the stage was set. Brock Lesnar versus Wes Hand for the third and final time. And let me tell you, it was a fucking nail-biter. We wrestled our asses off and ended up with a tie. So the match goes into overtime. Still no winner. When we got to the second overtime, I won the coin toss, which allowed me to choose to be on top or bottom. I knew I could ride Wes Hand, but I chose to go down. I wanted to explode out of there. Your best chance of getting away from your opponent is right off the whistle. It's the element of surprise. I tried to beat the whistle, and Wes stopped me. As our match continued, I went to stand up, but Wes pulled me down. I tried to switch, turned him around with a hip heist, and escaped with 9 seconds left. Point Lesnar. I did it. Everything I worked for, all the sacrifice, the dedication, the pain, the hopes and dreams of my family, who had sacrificed along with me. This was the moment we spent years fighting for. All that effort culminated in one brief moment when I was officially declared the NCAA Division I Heavyweight Wrestling Champion. 2 weeks before that, Jay Robinson had taught me the hip heist. By the way, that's the only credit I'm ever going to give Jay, so I hope he enjoys hearing about it. I'm an NCAA champion. Now what? An old college roommate of Jay Robinson's watched the NCAA tournament, and he wanted to meet me. His name was Jerry Briscoe, and he worked for the company that was known back then as the World Wrestling Federation. They have since changed their name to World Wrestling Entertainment, or WWE, but in 2000 they were the WWF, and they were proud of their federation. This is my book, and I'm calling them the WWE. If you don't like it, skip to the UFC chapters. As my college days were winding down, I really had to think about what I wanted to do with my life. A lot of people ask me why I didn't go for the 2000 Olympics in Sydney, Australia. The answer to that one is easy. I was sick and tired of being broke. I knew guys who were chasing the Olympic dream. They were driving up to the gym in their broken-down cars, working 9-to-5 jobs to support their training. I'd already been doing that my whole life. After everything I put myself through to win the NCAA title, I was done paying dues. It was my time to cash in. My dream was never the Olympics. It was to win the NCAA Heavyweight Championship. I achieved my goal, and I knew in my heart it was time to move on. The university was helping me in my transition from student athlete to professional. At the time, I was thinking about trying either professional football or professional wrestling. The school had a legal department, and they set up interviews for me with different attorneys and agents. I picked a Minneapolis lawyer named David Bradley Olson because he had the most experience. He had represented professional wrestlers, including Jesse the Body Ventura, and he had sued the WWE a couple of times. I had also met NFL head coach Tony Dungy a few times because he played football for the University of Minnesota back in the day. He wanted me to try out for the NFL in Tampa Bay, where he was calling the shots. Tony had a lot of faith in my ability to make the team, but I made a big decision the night before I was going to get on the plane for Florida. The NFL was going to have to wait. I was being offered a sure thing and was going to become a professional wrestler. Again, it was really simple. WWE offered me guaranteed money, including a big signing bonus with no strings attached. I would even get paid a huge salary for the time I was training to be a pro wrestler. My lawyers have told me I can't print how much I signed for because of a confidentiality clause. Here's what I can say. I signed the biggest development deal in WWE history. I can also tell you that I had absolutely no idea how lucrative my contract was because I didn't know anyone in the wrestling business. I hadn't even watched 5 minutes of pro wrestling in my life. All I knew was that I was a poor kid with student loans and I was being offered more money than I'd ever seen in my entire life. Brock Lesnar was off to join the circus. Part 2. The next big thing. Faith, family, federation. I remember my first meeting with WWE. I was 22 years old, and Vince McMahon flew me and my lawyer out to Connecticut. As soon as we landed, there was a limousine waiting to take us to the WWE World Headquarters in Stamford. The place was a little different from the gymnasiums I was used to, and looked like a rock concert that had collided with a wrestling museum. There were televisions everywhere showing WWE highlights. Heavy metal was playing over the sound system. Posters of WWE superstars lined the walls. There was a state-of-the-art gym and weight room, a full-service cafeteria, and a television production studio. For a farm boy from South Dakota, it was all pretty impressive. For those of you who don't know, Vince McMahon is world famous, and he is rich. Very rich. Since the 1980s, he's appeared on national television every week in his own programs, and he is the face of the WWE. But in addition to the role of WWE chairman he plays on TV, he is also the owner and creative mind behind the entire company. Vince is the absolute boss. Nothing happens in that company without his say-so. He's a big bodybuilder type with slick dark hair and a booming voice. He is larger than life and can sell snow cones to Eskimos. But I wasn't a pro wrestling fan at the time, so when I walked in, all I saw was the guy who could sign my paycheck. Vince was flanked by his lawyer, Ed Kaufman, Gerald Briscoe, and Jim J.R. Ross. Kaufman was a typical corporate type and looked totally out of place. Briscoe was a former amateur and professional wrestler who worked behind the scenes at the TV tapings, and also as a talent scout for the company. JR was the host of the TV shows, the play-by-play announcer, who was also, at that time, the executive vice president of talent relations. We all sat down at a large conference table in Vince's spacious office. I don't recall all of the details of the meeting, but there was one moment I'll never forget. As Vince and his team were explaining what I could expect from life in the WWE, remember, it was still WWF or World Wrestling Federation at the time, JR leaned over the table, looked me dead in the eye, and said with his Oklahoma drawl, "Mr. Lesnar, there are 3 things we take very seriously in this company: faith, family, and federation." I didn't know what the hell he was talking about, so I just nodded. I sure got it after a couple of years on the road, because by then, I thought I'd lost my faith. I didn't have a family because I was on the road 300 days a year, and all I had was the federation. That's how Vince McMahon ends up owning all these guys. All they have is that company, that business. All they have is what Vince allows them to have. He owns their careers, and their careers become their lives. So he owns them. It's a vicious cycle. These guys sacrifice and sacrifice and sacrifice. Then they make it, which means they have to work 300 days a year in a different city every night. That's when they lose their homes and their families. They end up working themselves to death, paying for homes they rarely visit, for kids they never see, and for ex-wives and then ex-wives' homes. Even early on, I could see that is not how I wanted to end up. But I have to say, between that first meeting with Vince and the last time I laced up my wrestling boots, it was one hell of a wild ride. Pro Wrestling 101. As soon as Vince was sure I was serious about professional wrestling and that I was willing to make the necessary commitment, we got down to business. In no time at all, we agreed on the money, shook hands, and I was on my way. My lawyer took care of the details, and just saying that now sounds funny to me. Only a few weeks before, I had gone to my lawyer's office in downtown Minneapolis for the first time, and I had to borrow money from him to get out of the parking ramp. Now, I was paying him to look out for me. Before the ink on my new contract was even dry, I was told that I had to relocate to Ohio Valley Wrestling, OVW, WWE's developmental territory in Louisville, Kentucky, to begin my pro wrestling training as soon as possible. I called JR and told him that I had some amateur wrestling community commitments in Minnesota, and it would be a few weeks before I could make it to Louisville. I got lucky on that one, because WWE was working hard to develop a recruitment understanding with the amateur wrestling community, and I was given the extra time. For the first time in my life, I had money in my pocket. I used my signing bonus to pay off my student loans, and I bought a motorcycle. I hadn't even stepped foot into a wrestling ring yet, and I was debt-free. Those WWE paychecks were coming in every week, and I thought I had it made. I've heard people say I got a handout from WWE because I got a big contract without coming up through the ranks like everyone else. That just pisses me off. I've never asked for a handout in my life, and I'd never take one if offered. Vince McMahon didn't become a billionaire by giving money away. People who think I got a handout from the WWE, or from anyone else for that matter, have no idea what they're talking about. Truth is, I worked my ass off to become an NCAA Division I heavyweight champion. Nobody handed me that honor. I worked for it. After I accomplished that goal, I looked at myself as a commodity, for sale to the highest bidder, similar to the dairy products we produced on the farm back in Webster. I knew I had a high value in the market because after years of hard work, I was a rare commodity. I was a 6'3", 285-pound athletic freak of nature. I was built like a big man, but could move like a small man. On top of all that, I wasn't just some local college wrestling champion from half a decade earlier. The NCAA Heavyweight Champion is wrestling's equivalent of a Heisman Trophy winner, and I had just won the title. During my college days, I proved that I had that certain something. Love me or hate me, people paid to watch me compete. Vince McMahon knew I could put asses in the seats. That is a rare talent. I took it to the market, and the market rewarded me. Even though I was going to remain in Minnesota for a while, I still wanted to get a jump on my pro wrestling training. I never do anything half-ass. I wanted to learn from the best, and it didn't take me long to learn that meant a call to Brad Ringens. Brad was a decorated amateur wrestler. He won a couple of gold medals at the Pan Am Games, a bronze medal at the World Championships in 1979, and was a two-time U.S. Olympic team member. As a matter of fact, Brad placed fourth at the 1976 Montreal Games and was on the 1980 squad that did not compete because of the U.S. boycott. Brad had also been an active professional wrestler for over a decade. In the United States, he was best known for his work with Vern Gagne's American Wrestling Association, AWA. He also worked overseas for New Japan Pro Wrestling, first as a wrestler and later as an agent for the office. He was never a main event guy, but Brad was consistent and always worked hard. Lots of the wrestlers who headlined big shows for many years have nothing to show for it, but Brad was smart and saved his money. All of it. I bet that fucker has the first dollar he ever made. And now, because he works so hard to save, he has a great life. Brad has a beautiful home and can go hunting and fishing whenever he feels like it. He enjoys his time, and he should. He earned everything he has, and his body bears the scars of years on the mat and in the ring. Soon after I started with Brad, I realized he was doing me a special favor. First, I found out that Brad had stopped running camps for aspiring pro wrestlers over a year before he agreed to bring me in. Then about 2 or 3 weeks into my training camp, I went out to lunch with Dan Jesser. Dan was a local wrestler that wanted to make it big time, and at the time, he was one of the top guys on the independent circuit in Minnesota. You know, the guys who show up at the local high school gym or in the city armory and make a couple of $100 for a wrestling show. We were just shooting the shit, and I mentioned that I had talked to Brad about something at Brad's house. Dan looked at me in shock and said, "Brad doesn't let anybody in his house." Dan told me he'd been working with Brad for 8 years and had never once been invited over. From that day on, I knew Brad considered me to be more than just a student. We were developing a long-standing relationship and building a true friendship. Brad trained hundreds of students over the years, and training those guys was always just business. But with me, it was different. Brad became my older brother, and to this day, he's family. Brad doesn't have a large family. It's just him and his mom. At Christmas time, Thanksgiving, all the family holidays, Brad is at our dinner table. I've opened my home to him the same way he opened his home to me. Curt Hennig. While I was training with Brad, I met someone who would become one of the greatest influences on my life. His name was Curt Hennig, and I wish he was here today to listen to this chapter. Curt was a second-generation wrestler, the son of a big-time wrestler in the AWA territory named Larry the Axe Hennig. When the old-timers all get together and start shooting the shit about the good old days of the AWA, they all talk about what a big, tough son of a bitch Larry Hennig was in his prime. Curt's dad smartened him up early about what the pro wrestling business had to offer and the price you have to pay to achieve success in it. I owe Curt a debt I will never be able to repay. He taught me something that sticks with me to this day. Curt taught me that in the wrestling business, you have to get in to get out. I can still hear him say the line. Curt knew the pro wrestling business was built on a pile of people who had been used for everything they were worth and then dumped on the side of the road. I'm not saying that's right or wrong. I'm just saying that's how it is. Since that's the score in pro wrestling, Curt came up with the idea that the only way to keep your sanity or your health was to get in to get out. I wish he practiced what he'd preached. Curt died in 2003. I really think about him every day. We could have had so much fun together. I miss him so much because with Curt you were never just passing time. You were enjoying every minute of it. Why did that fucker have to go and die? Louisville. After training with Brad for a few months and fulfilling my commitments to the amateur wrestling community, I was ready to head to Louisville and enter the WWE Developmental system. Then, I'd started watching a little pro wrestling on television so I could see what I was getting myself into. I bought a pickup truck, loaded all my things into the back, and hit the road. When I arrived in Louisville, I met up with former Golden Gopher Shelton Benjamin. I followed him as the #1 heavyweight at the university, and he stayed on as an assistant coach while I was there. Like me, Shelton had signed with WWE after being recruited by Gerald Briscoe. Shelton and I found a 2-bedroom apartment to rent in Louisville, and I was ready to start training. My first training session was at 9 o'clock on a Monday morning. When I got there, I couldn't believe it. The OVW Training Center was nothing more than a little box in the middle of a warehouse district. I thought, I'm working for this huge international company, and this is where all the big-time television wrestlers get trained? When I walked in the door, Danny Davis came right up to meet me. Danny was the owner of OVW and also the head trainer. I liked Danny from the beginning, and we became pretty good friends when I was in Louisville. I have nothing but good things to say about Danny. On my first day, he asked me, "Can you hit the ropes, kid?" There I was, NCAA Heavyweight Champion, almost 300 pounds, ready to take on the world, and Danny wanted to know if I could hit the ropes. I thought to myself, I've done this thousands of times at Brad's. I'll show this SOB just how hard and fast I can come off the ropes, and how good I look doing it. I got in the ring, and with a full head of steam, threw myself into the ring ropes just like I did every day back at Brad's camp. But instead of launching my body back across the ring like I was supposed to, I went straight through the ropes and crash-landed on the concrete floor with everyone watching. I nearly broke my ass in the process. What I didn't know at the time is that there are different types of ropes for wrestling rings. When I trained in Minnesota, Brad had an old-style WCW wrestling ring with ropes made from steel cable covered by a garden hose with tape over it. Danny's ropes were made out of real rope, just like the WWE used. Real rope has a lot more give to it than cable. I learned that the hard way. Looking back, I can see that making a fool out of myself was a good icebreaker because it showed everyone I was human. I make mistakes and bleed like everybody else. I can laugh about it now, but it wasn't the least bit funny to me then. Despite my initial stumble, I progressed quickly and excelled in practice every day. I understood what they were teaching, and I could do the things they wanted me to do in the ring. In a matter of weeks, Danny Davis decided to put me and Shelton together as a team, and we started going to all the little towns in the area, wrestling in front of tiny crowds in bingo halls, local community churches, high school gyms, you name it. We were working with a number of guys who are pretty well known today, but at the time were just starting out like I was. Batista, John Cena, Randy Orton, Mark Henry. It was a pretty easy life at OVW compared to the training I was used to. We were home every night, and the checks came in steady, without fail. Danny gave me the honor of transporting the ring to each show, and then back to his house for storage. He said he chose me because I kept talking about my work ethic, but I think it had more to do with the fact that I had a pickup truck. Regardless, the ring was my responsibility. Since I was in charge of the ring, I made sure all the other guys were there on time to help set it up. If they weren't, Danny heard about it, because to me, it was a team effort. I didn't give a shit how long somebody had been there, and nobody was going to give me any backtalk either, because if they did, they were going to have to get into it with me. I don't think I was disliked for making everyone carry their own weight, but if I was, I really didn't give a fuck. I was there to excel, and I had made up my mind to be better than anyone I was training with. I wasn't at OVW to win a popularity contest. I was there to learn so I could move up to the WWE, where the big money was. Some guys at OVW would stay out late every night so they could act like they were somebody for the locals in the bar. I probably end up at the bar only twice a month, at the most, because I had no desire or interest in trying to impress the locals down there. I wanted to hit the gym in the morning before practice, do my workouts in the ring, and then have the rest of the day off. At the time, we were only doing the local wrestling shows 3 nights a week, with weekends off, so I had a lot of time to myself, just the way I like it. I had a good time at OVW. Danny and his wife Julie were great to me. Just like with Brad, my relationship with Danny was more than just teacher-student. We actually became friends. Danny invited me into his home, and I appreciated it. I was at Danny's house often, because the ring was there, and Danny and Julie would usually invite me in for lunch. In exchange for the free lunches, I did some handyman work for them here and there. That's one thing about being a farm boy. You learn to fix anything. But I also knew that if I offered to fix something, Danny would always cook me a big steak when I was done. We remain friends to this day. The only thing I didn't like about Louisville was having to be around Jim Cornette, who was Danny Davis's partner in OVW. Cornette was a pro wrestling manager for many years, and he was Jim Ross's buddy, so JR protected him every time he got in trouble for throwing his weight around. Jim Cornette rubbed me the wrong way from the first day I met him, because he liked to bully people. People would take shit from him because he could get you blackballed with Vince if he wanted to. He had his girlfriend on the television show, running around doing this ugly dominatrix routine. Everything about them was disgusting to me. He didn't like me because he knew I couldn't stand him. It was painful for me just to listen to that guy speak. Painful in a way that made me want to snap his neck. He found out right away that he wasn't going to bully me around, and that bothered him every time he saw me. After a while, I knew I had learned all I was going to learn in Louisville. John Laurinaitis was just then transitioning into the role of WWE's VP of Talent Relations, and I told him I was done doing the small local shows and that I needed a bigger challenge. I told John, if you want me to get better, then you need to put me in the ring with better people. I asked John to give me a chance at the next level, just a couple of dark matches to show them how far along I had come. The dark matches are non-televised matches done right before television tapings to warm up the crowd and to let the WWE brass take a look at you. I knew all I needed was a chance. Let me perform on the non-televised portion of the show, I told John, and I will work harder and better than everyone else. If I can show you what I've got, I'll be up on the main roster. If I didn't belong, I knew Vince would get rid of me. He was paying me too much to wait forever for me to make him a return on his investment. But as far as I was concerned, I had done my time in the Louisville minor leagues, and it was time for me to see how far I could go in the big time. I reminded John that Goth, JR, and Briscoe had said I would only be in Louisville for a year, and by that point, I'd been in Louisville for a year and 4 months. I felt like someone had lied to me. I had done my time, so I decided it was time to leave Louisville, and I packed my bags and moved back to Minneapolis. The next big thing. Within days of returning to Minneapolis, I received the call. WWE wanted me to go on the road with them and start out by doing dark matches. The fight to make it as a wrestling entertainer was on. The very first dark matches I remember are the ones where they put me in the ring with Billy Gunn. We were in Nashville or Knoxville. All these towns ended up being the same to me real quick. One night, and Kurt and Brad had come down to watch. I was doing the shooting star press, an inward backflip off the top rope to a full layout landing on top of my opponent at the time, and both Kurt and Brad had these looks on their faces like, "What the fuck is wrong with you, Brock?" They both got on me right away, saying, "You're gonna have a pretty short career if you keep doing that 300-pound gorilla backflip. Figure out a new finish." These guys told me straight up because they cared. "Leave that to the smaller guys," Kurt said. "They need every advantage they can grab in this business. You don't need that move. It's not worth the risk." But I kept doing the shooting star because it was spectacular. I wanted to be the best, and no one my size should be able to pull off that move. If you can't picture the sight of a 300-pound man rotating through the air and crashing down on his opponent, or if you've never seen me do the shooting star, the videos are easy to find on the internet. You will be amazed by what you see. You will also be horrified when you see what happens when I don't land the move. I'm lucky that I didn't end up in a wheelchair. In the beginning, I was traveling with Kurt Angle and Taz. That was both good and bad, because both of those guys played pretty big roles in my development and my near destruction. Kurt Angle was the 1996 Olympic gold medal winner in wrestling, and I liked the way he approached the wrestling entertainment business, because when he laced up his boots, he came to sweat. The word on Kurt was that he only had one gear, and that was hyper overdrive. Kurt and I got to know each other pretty well because we had amateur wrestling in common, and he answered my questions about the business of pro wrestling because he started a few years before me. Kurt could have turned to Ultimate Fighting right after the 1996 Olympics, but the timing would have been bad. The UFC wasn't happening in 1996, and the money was nothing like it is today. The very first day I met Brad Ringens, he told me, "Life is about timing." It didn't dawn on me at that moment, but years later I got it. Everything has to fall into the right time frame. If you're not in the right place at the right time, it's not going to happen for you. To this day, I get asked questions about Kurt and his chances as an MMA fighter. Could Kurt in his prime have fought in the UFC? Absolutely. And he would have torn it up. Could Kurt fight in the UFC now? Absolutely not. After all of his pro wrestling injuries, he could not even pass the physical. In his day, Kurt Angle was one tough son of a bitch. But Kurt never had someone like Kurt Hennig in his ear, telling him to get in, to get out. And he never learned the real nature of the pro wrestling business until it was too late. It's really too bad, because Kurt got completely caught up in the show business side of wrestling. He started living his character, like so many do. In the wrestling business, a fan who buys into all of the stories and buys all of the merchandise is known as a mark. In my opinion, Kurt Angle marked out for the business, and because of that, I think he ended up selling his soul to the devil. That's the tragedy of Kurt Angle. He seemed to burn through all of his options. His body has been ravaged by the brutal schedule and nightly punishment in the ring, and he will end up wrestling until it kills him. Part of it was bad timing. Kurt didn't have an MMA option. But the thing that screwed Kurt up the most, the person who really fucked him over, the biggest problem Kurt had, was Kurt. He thought he had all of the answers, but he didn't even have the right questions. But more on Kurt later. Taz was a unique guy too. Here was this sawed-off, pissed-off wrestler whose biggest push was behind him, and he was trying his hardest to transition into the role of an on-air commentator. Why not? It's a great gig, the money is good, and you don't have to take bumps in the ring every night. Taz could talk his ass off, which would have made him a good commentator, and did make him an entertaining guy to be in the car with. Taz was also a big amateur wrestling fan, knew my history, and he knew I wanted to make it to the top. I wasn't shy about it, and he liked that about me. One day, Taz heard the stupid way they wanted me to work in a dark match. Old-fashioned, plotting, monster heel, fake pro wrestling bullshit. Taz just shook his head. He said, "That sucks. No sugarcoating, no bullshit." I like that about Taz. He had been around for a long time, and he wasn't playing the corporate puppet. He respected my credentials, and I respected his honesty. Taz heard all these veterans giving me bad advice about how a big man is supposed to work, but I knew it was a new day and age. Taz knew it too, so he took me over to meet Paul Heyman. As you know, Paul is writing this book with me, so it's kind of funny talking about him, but this is where we became instant friends. I didn't know Paul from Adam, but he got involved in my next 2 dark matches. Paul went right to Vince McMahon and went to bat for me. All of a sudden, the machine started getting ready for me. I was told I was needed at WrestleMania in Toronto, and I'd be wrestling during the Fan Access Convention. Next thing I know, Paul is pulling me aside, all excited, and says, "We're starting on TV the day after Mania." I made my national TV debut in March 2002. I started by doing these run-ins, which are brief appearances on camera, where I would jump in the ring and hit people with my finishing maneuver, which they ended up calling the F5. The maneuver consisted of me throwing my opponent up over my head, spinning him, then slamming him to the canvas all in one fluid motion. Everyone ate it up. WWE fans were looking for a new star, and here I was, just smashing everything in my path. After my first TV shot, everything happened so fast. It's really all just a blur. Kind of like I've been F5 myself. My entire time in WWE was a blur, actually, but those first few months were even blurrier. Paul became my on-air agent. They didn't want him to be an old-school wrestling manager, and Vince liked the idea of a heel agent because he hated dealing with Hollywood agents. And I got moved into a program pretty quick with the Hardy Boys. I really liked working with them. They could move around, the crowds loved them, and they could sell my moves in a way that got the audience into the match and mad at me. Lita, one of the WWE divas, was dating Matt Hardy at the time, and she was with them on camera as well. So that gave me and Paul someone else to pick on to get even more heat. Nothing like picking on a woman to get a crowd riled up. I want to mention something here in this book quickly, and then I want to move on from the subject. While all of this is happening, my daughter Maya was born. Right after my debut, and just as I started going on the road, this little baby came into my life and changed everything forever. I became a father on April 10th, 2002. No matter what I do for the rest of my life, I will always be Maya Lynn Lesner's father first and foremost. Her mother and I weren't meant to be together forever, and that's how life is sometimes. We don't have to agree on anything, but we sure agree on one thing in life. We both love Maya very much, and I can tell you that from the day my daughter was born, I have been a blessed man because of her. I was picking up some really good steam on television, and I started getting booked for WWE shows all over the world right away. In the business, the more you work and the more fans you draw, the more you make. While my paychecks were getting bigger and bigger, I was away from home more and more. That's the trade-off, and it's just another way the wrestling business eats you up. Life on the road was wild. I was flying to a new city every day and living the life of a rock star. Everywhere I went, people knew me. I was having a great time, and who wouldn't? Money, girls, more money. The only problem was that none of it was real. It wasn't a life. It was killing time. I would look around the locker room before shows and think how lucky I was. I was probably the youngest guy there, and I was headed straight to the top. The other guys in that room weren't so lucky. They were trapped in the life. They had no way out. They were drinking and popping pain pills like they were going out of style. and they were miserable because they had lost their faith along with their families. All they had was the Federation. I didn't want to be an old man, pulling pads over my surgically repaired, broken-down knees, struggling to pull on my elbow pads with arthritic shoulders, popping pain pills to make it through one more big-money match. So as much fun as I was having, even right off the bat, I was thinking about how I was going to get out. Kurt's words were ringing in my ears. Get in to get out. Once we got past the Hardys, the rocket ship was really strapped to my ass and the fuse was lit. That's when the whole deal went down involving the match that never happened with Stone Cold Steve Austin, one of the WWE's biggest stars at the time. Why was he a star? Because Stone Cold says so. He was a big, tough, raunchy, rude, crude, beer-guzzling good old boy, and the crowds couldn't get enough of him. Paul knows the story better than I do, because he was behind the scenes with Vince, and I was just doing my job, being on time, wrestling my matches, collecting my paychecks. But I'll do my best to tell you what I remember. I got to Atlanta, and the WWE road agent told me I would be working with Steve that night, and that I was going to beat him somehow. But minutes later, everything changed. I heard that Steve had walked out, went home. With Steve gone, Vince needed to do something quick. Paul pulled me aside and brought me 2 steaks from Vince's office. He always stole a couple of Vince's afternoon steaks and brought them to me. I never asked if Vince knew. I was just happy to get the prime cut. As I worked on the steak, Paul explained the new swerve. Vince himself was going to wrestle Ric Flair that night in Atlanta. A battle between 2 50-something guys, with the storyline being a winner-take-all bet for Vince's storyline 50% of WWE ownership against Flair's storyline 50%. But just when it looked to the crowd like Flair was going to beat Vince, I'd come down, jump into the ring, and cost Flair the match. Vince would then owe a huge favor to the next big thing. According to our quickly prepared script, Paul was supposed to call in my favor for me by telling Vince on national TV that if I won at King of the Ring 2002, I would get a title shot at the SummerSlam pay-per-view. The fans watching the show didn't know it yet, but Vince had already decided to make me the youngest WWE Heavyweight Champion in history. Here I was, just a few months after my official TV debut, and only a year out of college, and I was being set up to take the WWE title in the main event of the second biggest pay-per-view of the year. I'd been watching my checks get bigger and bigger every week, and I couldn't even imagine how much I was about to make from those 2 events. The main event of a pay-per-view show is as big as it gets in our business. That's just it. It was always about business for me. I wasn't in it for the fame or the glory, though I had some fun with both for a little while. I was in it for the money. I wanted to feed my family, give my parents and my children the best lives that I could provide for them, and get out while I was still relatively young and healthy. That summer on my rocket ship to the top just flew by. I don't really remember making my Madison Square Garden debut against Ric Flair, but I sure remember getting paid for it. I don't remember how many times we went to the UK that summer, but I remember that my paycheck got bigger each and every time I went back. I don't remember any specifics about the King of the Ring pay-per-view, but I remember it being by far the biggest payday I had to that point in my career. That's what happens when you live on the road and in front of the TV cameras. You can't tell one town from the other, or one show from the next. They all just blend together. You get up in a hotel that looks like all of the other hotels, drive to the airport in a generic rental car, get on a plane, and don't care where you land, because it's always the same. The routine gets old really fast, and it never changes. Sometimes I get lucky enough to get into the town early enough so I could go to a gym and maybe find a decent meal. After that, though, it would be just killing time until I had to go to the arena. I couldn't really do much, because fans recognized me everywhere I went, so most often, I just stayed in my room. Once I got to the arena, I had to shake everyone's hand, because that's the unwritten law. As if God himself made it the 11th commandment. I hadn't seen the boys since we all stood around the baggage claim at the airport a few hours before, hoping our bags would come around quickly so we could beat everyone else to the rental car line. But we would always shake hands, and everyone would smile like they were glad to see each other. It was all so fucking phony, it made me sick. Meanwhile, while I'm going through the motions on the never-ending treadmill that road life had become, all I could think of was getting home so I could see my baby daughter, Maya, because she would grow up just a little bit more every day I was gone. I was missing out on all these wonderful experiences with my child, missing out on all the greatest things about being a dad, and was doing the bullshit shaking hands routine with a bunch of people I just saw a few hours ago like they were long-lost brothers. It was insane. It got to the point that I remember one day looking across the locker room at Ric Flair, who was then in his mid-50s, and saying to myself, "That's not going to be me." I don't mean that as any disrespect toward Rick. He gave his life to the wrestling business. He was truly one of the greats, and he deserves a lot of credit for what he did. But being a rookie and having to carry this legend's ass through a match was a real eye-opener for me. I know a lot of people love Rick for all the entertainment he's provided them over the years, but here I am in the ring with this 16-time world champion in front of 20,000 screaming people, with millions more watching on live television, and his head's anywhere but in the ring with me. I don't know if he was thinking about one of his many divorces or who he was going to pick up in the local bar after the show, but he sure wasn't thinking about how to make the two of us look good. At his age, and with the party boy life he'd led, he was nowhere near what he used to be. How could he be? So, with all the greatness that his name is supposed to represent, and all the years he had spent on top, what the fuck was he doing there? Why would he even want to just be one of the many gatekeepers stepping into the ring with this young buck on his way up the ladder? Why wasn't Flair waiting for a once-in-a-while opportunity to come back, do a big storyline with the right guy, and collect a nice juicy payday for a WrestleMania match? Everyone always talked about how great Flair used to be, how he was the greatest performer of his generation, and maybe even of all time. I thought it would be an honor to work with him. But by the time I came along, he was half out of it, and I had to carry him through a 10-minute match and do all the work so the fans would get what they paid for. All he had left was his trademark, "Woo!" I looked at him and thought, wow, that's so sad. I wasn't going to be him. I wondered how many of his own kids' birthday parties did Flair miss? How many of their graduations? Did his kids grow up without him so he could be a big wrestling star? And now here he was, pushing 60 years old and still wearing tights. He became his character, the nature boy Ric Flair, and I guess he couldn't let go. Was he addicted to the fame? Or did he need the money because he pissed it all away on parties, women, and divorce settlements? I don't know, and I don't care. All I know is that even though I was still a rookie, I was already waking up to what the business can do to you, and he never did. Flair was known as the best, and if the business could break him, it could happen to anyone, even me. That's why every time I looked at Flair, every time I saw that old man climb in the ring and let out a woo, I heard Curt Hennig's voice in my head. Get in to get out. Winning the title from The Rock. I only wrestled Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson 3 times. The first time was in Australia, right before we worked the SummerSlam main event at the Nassau Coliseum in Long Island, New York, for the undisputed WWE Championship. I had won the King of the Ring and was headed for my first pay-per-view main event. There's a lot of pressure on someone when they have to main event with the top star of the day. You have to be careful not to hurt the golden goose, but you also have to make your match look good. To get me ready for The Rock, we did a match on television against Hulk Hogan. This was a big deal, because Hogan didn't wrestle every week on TV. WWE was portraying him as the legend of all legends, and to make me the focal point of the promotion, we were going to do a major incident on television where I took Hulk Hogan out. I was honored to get into the ring with Hogan, but at the same time, I looked at things a little differently from everyone else. Yes, Hogan was the biggest star of the 80s and 90s. He drew huge gates and sold millions of pay-per-views. This guy had made more money than any other wrestler of his era. But here he was, squeezing out another run at age 50-something, just like Ric Flair. So he did this deal with Hulk Hogan, where I took Hogan out violently on the WWE SmackDown TV show. I knew the script because Paul was the lead writer of the show, and we communicated all the time. Vince kept telling me we needed to make this as memorable a night as possible for the fans, because this was a big moment in my career. I was going to slay the immortal Hulk Hogan, bust him open, and leave him for dead. Other wrestlers had jumped Hogan from behind before, or attacked him to build interest in an upcoming match, but I was going to beat the crap out of him face to face. Vince didn't just want me to get over, he wanted me over the top. There was a lot riding on that SummerSlam pay-per-view, and WWE was counting on a big buy rate to carry the promotion into the fall. The Rock was a proven commodity, but putting a rookie in the main event of your second biggest show of the year was a risk. Vince liked to take chances in life, but he called them calculated risks. The idea was to really pump up the interest in my match with The Rock by having me hit Hulk Hogan with the F5, crack him over the head with a chair, bust his head open, and wipe his blood across my chest like Brock the Conqueror. It was pretty dramatic stuff. Vince figured if that didn't position me as a top star with the WWE audience and give me the boost and credibility needed to draw some serious money with The Rock at SummerSlam, nothing would. Behind the scenes, Hogan was being written out of the future scripts, and he wasn't going to appear at the Australia show. With no Hogan to work the main event down under, it gave me and Dwayne a chance to work with each other for the first time, and to feel each other out before we got in the ring with everyone watching at SummerSlam. We were in Melbourne doing a triple threat match, 3 wrestlers in the ring at the same time, with The Rock defending his undisputed WWE Heavyweight Championship against both me and Triple H. When Dwayne and I got in the ring together, we could both tell that we had instant chemistry. I know we stole the show. Everyone could immediately tell we were going to be big box office against each other. It was a week and a half before SummerSlam, and we were ready. WWE needed a new champion because Dwayne was taking time off after the show to do a movie. So the key here was to go all the way with this kid, Brock Lesnar, because I had to carry the load for the company while Dwayne was off shooting films. Not everyone has what it takes to sell tickets on a nightly basis at major arenas and sell millions of dollars worth of pay-per-views several times a year. That's what a champion does. Vince thought I had what it took to pull that off. He was right. Dwayne, of course, is a very smart guy. He was going to have his character, The Rock, do a clean job for me because he wanted to grease the wheels for himself to come back when the time was right. Dwayne knew putting me over was right for business, and he was willing to take a loss for the team on pay-per-view in front of all of his fans. He saw the talent I had, and he knew it would be best for the company if there were no questions in the fans' minds that I beat him fair and square. That way, after I had my ride at the top, he could beat me in a revenge match when he came back, and he would look even better. It would be huge. WWE would make a lot of money, I'd make a lot of money, Dwayne would make a lot of money. That's the pro wrestling business at its best. Dwayne also knew that it wasn't only right for business to put me over clean, but that Vince had it in his own head that The Rock should lose clean to Brock Lesnar. If Dwayne wanted the door open for a return, he had to keep Vince happy and have him think that Dwayne always gave back to the company, looked after what was right for business. Vince has ended more than one career when someone crossed him and put their own interests above the company's. Dwayne was too smart for that, and he did everything the right way. The smart way. I don't know how many other guys Dwayne would have been happy to lose to clean, but he did it for me because he knew I could carry the torch for the company until he got it back. It wasn't a gift. It was business. On August 25, 2002, at age 25, I became the youngest WWE Champion in history when I defeated The Rock for the title at SummerSlam. That night changed my life forever. I was now in a position to regularly score $250,000 paydays for a night's work and more. I was now able to buy a lot of things. I'll always appreciate what Dwayne did for me and my family. If he hadn't made me look good, things might have been a lot different. Beating The Rock at SummerSlam 2002 made me a true superstar in the eyes of the fans. I didn't have just any title. I had the ultimate prize in sports entertainment, the undisputed WWE Heavyweight Championship of the world. I wasn't just another guy in the locker room, or a curtain jerker, or a mid-card guy, or a guy hoping and praying to catch a break. I was the main event. People paid to see me, and that's exactly what I wanted, because that's where the serious money kicks in. In my first ever pay-per-view in some city I can't remember, I beat Jeff Hardy in an undercard match and got a check for $16,500. Now, I was headlining pay-per-views and making six figures every time. Not a bad night's work. And it all literally happened overnight. 10 minutes in the ring with Jeff Hardy was really cool. But 20 minutes in the ring with Dwayne, and I was set for life. That's why the match with Dwayne was such a big moment in my life. It wasn't about who was better, who would really win. Come on, that's ridiculous. It was about the fact I wanted to buy my mom and dad a house. I wanted to put money away for my daughter's education. I wanted to be able to afford nice things in life for me and my family. I was the undisputed WWE Champion on the fast track to fame and fortune. I was on top of the world. And I was already looking over my shoulder because I knew that the clock was ticking and my days were numbered. The Undertaker. As soon as I became undisputed WWE Champion, the decision was made to let both Raw and SmackDown have their own champions. So WWE branded 2 weekly shows that aired on different nights, and each brand carried its own roster of wrestlers. My very first television appearance as the WWE Champion was on a Monday Night Raw that was broadcast live from Madison Square Garden. I know all these famous arenas mean something to a lot of people, and there is a lot of history in the Garden, but none of that means shit to me. Today, I like fighting in Las Vegas because I have a routine there that I'm used to. Minnesota is great because I can just drive home that night. Anywhere else is just another place to me. Just another in a long line of arenas in cities I don't get to see, with the same locker rooms where I have to shake everyone's hand and then say goodnight and safe travels before meeting up with all of them in a few hours in a new city I won't get to see. At the end of that first night on TV as champion, Paul and I jumped ship and went over to the SmackDown roster, all part of the script, of course, as everything is in professional wrestling, and Raw was left without a champion. With Paul writing SmackDown, I saw how this was going to play out. When I left Raw, it opened the door for Triple H, who is now Vince's son-in-law, to be a champion. But that never bothered me. I really didn't care, because as long as I could just keep main eventing the pay-per-views, things would be fine. Triple H would be the world champion on Raw. Good for him. I would be the WWE champion on SmackDown. When it came time for the pay-per-views, someone had to be the top dog. Sometimes, that depended on the person you were defending the title against. Advantage: Lesnar. Why? Because my first feud as champion was against one of Vince's favorites, The Undertaker. I have to say, there were some guys I liked wrestling with, or I guess I should say performing with. In the business, we just say working, and I enjoyed working with The Big Show. I also liked working with Kurt Angle, Hulk Hogan, and Dwayne Johnson. I liked working with anyone who was what they called over, which meant the person meant something to the audience. I liked working with anyone who was going to have some box office appeal, because I was in the business to make money. The fame and the glory goes away. The money can help you and your family afford a better life. Of all of the guys I worked with, I probably liked working with The Undertaker more than anyone else. Working with him was just so easy. He had that dead man gimmick, and he knew how to play it. Taker is a bright guy too, and he knew I could make him look great. He also knew it was going to look believable when I beat him down. Another reason I like working with Taker is that it was so much easier for me to bump around the ring for his moves. He was a lot bigger than I was, and the fans not only loved his character, but they believed he was a legitimate badass. Bumping for a guy bigger than me is always going to be easier than bumping around all night long for the Hardy Boys. It's just a different style match. With the Hardys, you have to build and build and build until it's time to take that bump. With Taker, he's so big, you can just bump around right away. There was also that mystique The Undertaker had. He was going to be the first person to really hand Brock Lesnar an ass-kicking, so he was going to make it look good. I had no problem with that. As long as people were going to pay to see us go at it, I was happy. We had our first pay-per-view match in Los Angeles, at the show called Unforgiven. Vince wanted us to do this stupid finish where Taker ends up throwing me through the big set at the top of the stage. I hated it, but I knew we were setting up the rematch, which would be a Hell in a Cell match. That meant my first 2 pay-per-views as champion would be in the main event position, which meant I was getting top pay. Okay, so the first finish was going to be stupid. I was still happy. That Hell in a Cell match against The Undertaker was my favorite match in WWE. That night, everything just clicked the right way. Taker was on his game, and I was ready to go. People were convinced The Undertaker was either going to beat Brock Lesnar or get his own ass beat pretty good. This wouldn't be just another monthly pay-per-view main event. This was going to be something special. And it was. Taker bloodied me up early. Taker bloodied me up early and bloodied up Paul, who was outside the cage playing the part of my agent, just to teach me a lesson in respect. That was the story of the match, and I think we sold it pretty well. We worked as hard a style as you can work without being reckless, and I understand people consider the match we had to be a classic. I don't know how many Hell in a Cell matches they've done in WWE over the years, but I'd put this one up against any of them. I know Taker thought it was something special, and I just knew it in my gut that night we had a match that we could be proud of. Thanks, Mark. I appreciate the way you put me over. Next in line, The Big Show. My next opponent after Undertaker was originally supposed to be Hulk Hogan. He was going to come back, looking for revenge after I hammered him on TV. Vince wanted to do a storyline where Hogan was looking to settle the score, and the Lesnar vs. Hogan match would air live from Madison Square Garden as the main event of Survivor Series 2002. I would be headlining yet another pay-per-view. Vince wanted Hogan to look really good, but fall short of beating me for the title. I guess the old Hulkster didn't like that idea too much, and the next thing I know, we were going with Plan B, The Big Show. I had met Show when I was still in Louisville, and we didn't exactly hit it off right away. He pissed Vince or someone off because he was not in shape, and they sent him down to the developmental squad as a punishment. He was a giant of a man, 7 feet tall and 500+ pounds, but Vince wanted his wrestlers to look good. No one pays to see a couple of fat guys roll around the mat. So I first met Show when I was in Louisville to learn the business, and I was taking everything seriously. I wanted to get called up to the main roster and the bigger paydays as soon as I could. When Show got demoted to Louisville, he looked at the kids training there like everyone was a fucking maggot or something. He was all grumpy right from the get-go because he had to lose some weight, and everyone in camp was afraid of him. Everyone but me. I wasn't afraid of Show, even if he did have almost a foot and 200-some pounds on me, and I let him know it one day. We were in practice, and we got into the ring. He thought I was just another dumb jock greenhorn who was going to be intimidated by him, but I dropped him to the mat with a real wrestling move, and he was crying uncle. I kept the pressure on him because I didn't like the way he thought he was so much better than all the guys down there. I earned his respect that day, and I had no problem doing it either. Another day, he was bullying everyone around, and I decided to bully him back. He got all hot and told me, "I'll be back up in the main events making millions, and you'll still be down here in Louisville setting up the ring." When I got to the big time, I decided to remind Show of our little incidents in Louisville. As soon as I had to work with Show, I waited until the time was right, and I said, "Remember down in Louisville when you said—" He cut me off right there and said, "I know where this is going, and fuck you." I still tortured the big bastard, and while I was doing it, I taunted him a little more. "Hey, didn't I take you down in front of everyone too? Hey, sorry about that, Show." I laughed. He didn't. He was always so sensitive. But I like Show, because he turned out to be one of the best people you could ever be around. Hell, he cried when I told everyone I was going to leave WWE. He's just a super nice, sentimental guy, and he's trapped in that massive body. That can't be easy. I know when I was 300 pounds of muscle, it was hard to carry all that weight around. Imagine adding 200 pounds of not-so-lean mass on top of that, and 9 or 10 more inches in height. I loved working with Show because, just like with Undertaker, I'm in there with someone even I would call a monster. A lot of people consider me to be a monster, but Big Show really is one, so I didn't mind bumping my ass off for him. The difference in working with Taker and working with Show, besides that mystique Undertaker had, is that Show legitimately weighed 500 pounds. That wasn't just a made-up gimmick. He weighed 500 pounds. Picking him up was a bitch. It hurt. As big as he was, and as much as it hurt to pick his big ass up off the canvas and toss him, I had to do it, and I had to shine when I did, because WWE was planning to have Show beat me for the title. The story would have Paul double-cross me and help Big Show win the championship from the unbeaten Brock Lesnar. So to set it up, I had to throw this 500-pounder around every night, and that took a toll on my body fast. The match at Survivor Series was very simple. I F5 Show, but Paul would then reveal that he sold out Brock Lesnar by breaking up the referee's count. About a minute later, I would get screwed out of the title. I was the biggest heel or bad guy in WWE, and I had just been robbed. The fans knew my character was going to go after Show and Paul for revenge, which made me a new babyface or hero. I can't say my character became a good guy. I was just going to beat up the guys people were willing to pay to see me pound on. One night in South Africa, Show and I were working in the main event. We had been working with each other for months and had come up with a pretty easy match we could do every night and make the people happy they had paid their money to see us. He'd go out to the ring with Paul, and Paul would cut a promo, getting the crowd all riled up, which wrestling people called getting up the heat. Then I would come in, and we'd start the match hot, with me dumping the big bastard on his head a bunch of times. Show would get his heat, miss something, I'd smash him, F5 him, and then F5 Paul after the match. The fans loved it. I loved it because we knew the routine, and it worked. No problems, right? There we were in some city in South Africa. Think about it. South fucking Africa. Keep it simple, same routine. It was safe, it worked, and I was hurting enough just throwing this 500-pound monster around every night. I was tired, I was injured, and I didn't want any surprises. Right before our match, Show came over to where I was dressing, smoking a cigarette. That alone is funny because a cigarette in that huge hand looks like a cut-off toothpick. I hate cigarettes, and he had to know that. After I made him put the damn thing out, he said, "Let's change the match around tonight." We're as far away from home as we can be. We might as well be on the planet Mars. We knew the match. It was easy. Why change it? Show got all upset with me, and he kept saying over and over again, "I'm a veteran. I'm the heel. I get to call the match." I couldn't believe he was serious. Okay, we were all dealing with the stress from traveling halfway around the world. Bad news for Show, though, I wasn't in the mood for his shit that night. "Whatever you want to do is fine with me," I told the big grump. "Just call it out in the ring." So here's this 7-foot-tall, 500-pound giant, and he's mumbling to himself as he walks away from me. It's so funny when I think about it now, because Show is the most likable guy you'll ever meet. But he had me ready to stretch his ass over in fucking South Africa. Show was all huffy and puffy going out to the ring, determined to call the match the way he wanted it to go. But as soon as I hit the ring, I snatched him and started suplexing him all over the place. Show backed me into a corner and was going for a big chop across my chest, but I ducked under and waist-locked him. Once my hands were clasped, he had a pretty good idea about what was coming next. I was going to pivot my hips and throw him anywhere I wanted him to go. Show started screaming at me, "No, no, 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 no!" But I didn't listen. I threw him across the ring, and I can still hear the thud he made when he landed. Before he could get up, I ran across the ring, grabbed him, and locked my hands around him again. He started panicking. "Brock, what the hell are you doing? Wait, 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 wait!" So I flung him around a few more times. He learned his lesson. After that, we got along great. I flew around for show when it came time for the part of the match they call the heat, which is when the heel is getting the crowd angry by beating up the babyface and building the anticipation for the babyface to get back up and kick the heel's ass. Show got on my nerves a little bit sometimes, but I could never hate him. I'm sure I got on his nerves too, especially when I took him down again one night in the locker room because of his damn smoking. Sorry about that, Show. I loved working with you. Next to Taker, you were my favorite opponent. Kurt Angle. There's so much more for me to say about Kurt Angle. By the time Kurt and I were locked in for WrestleMania, I was already feeling the toll of life on the road and in the spotlight. I was drinking a lot of vodka and using it to wash down the Vicodins. I was hurt, dating back even before I dropped the title to the Big Show. My ribs were broken, and they hurt like hell, and I had a torn PCL, posterior cruciate ligament, in my knee. I was flying to a new city every night, drinking more and more, washing down the pills, all just to dull the pain. It got old real fast. I kept thinking to myself that I was living a life that my mom and dad wouldn't want me living, and there was good reason for that. I always felt that Kurt was jealous of the way I was brought in and immediately pushed to the top. Kurt was up and down the cards, and the only time they made him WWE Champion was when they wanted him to drop the title to someone else. I never won an Olympic gold medal like Kurt, but he never won an NCAA heavyweight title like me. But we were both champions, and that was something we understood about each other. Kurt and I also had something else in common. He seemed to be self-destructing. At the time, so was I. The only difference is that I jumped off the train before it was too late for me. Kurt never did. When I hit the top, Kurt was already in trouble because he seemed to have no confidence in himself outside of pro wrestling. All Kurt had was pro wrestling. His character had become his whole life. The big difference between us is that I never lost my confidence. Kurt and I were both world-class athletes who had the same decision to make. My decision was to move on. His was to hang on. I have no regrets. I chose to jump off the train, move as close to my daughter as possible. Nothing was more important to me than making sure my family life would be stable. Kurt was never able to do that. He got so caught up in everything, I think he lost sight of reality. It's a shame, because I honestly don't think Kurt knows how to jump off that train. It's easy for people to blame the wrestling business when top-notch people like Kurt Angle get consumed. But that's just a cop-out. It's not the wrestling business's fault, and I can say that with absolute certainty because there are people who come out of that business alive and in good health. I could easily have ended up like some of the less fortunate. I'd been popping pills for a while just to kill the pain of being on the road, of injuries that never heal, and I started drinking vodka. Lots of vodka. I can't even tell you how much for sure, but it seems like a bottle every 1 or 2 days, with a couple of hundred pain pills each month to go with it. You want to know why there aren't more stories in this book about my pro wrestling days? Because the truth is, I don't remember a lot of that period of my life. The even sadder truth is that my consumption of booze and pills was on the light end of the scale compared to some guys who had been around longer than me. They were really trapped, and they knew they would never get out. So they escaped another way. When I started to make an assessment of my life back then, I realized that if I stayed long enough, I'd end up just like them. Nowhere to go, and not even remembering where I'd been. It's not the pro wrestling business itself that's the real problem. It's the lifestyle that goes along with it. The schedule is too demanding for anyone. You have to live on the road, and at the same time deal with the injuries, fans, rental car people, hotel clerks, restaurant waiters and waitresses, company politics, everyone walking around like a zombie and never being home. And on those rare occasions when you get to go home, you're supposed to suddenly turn it all off and just try to be daddy. Yeah, salesmen travel, and they're gone a lot too. But they don't get body slammed by 250-pound men, or tear up their knees by landing a backflip off the top rope, or have their ribs crushed, or get concussed, or have their arms twisted out of the sockets each night before they head to the airport. Pro wrestlers do, and they're expected to heal on the plane, get a few hours of sleep in a hotel, then show up looking good the next night in the next city. People still talk about this supposed shoot match that Kurt and I had, where we legitimately competed against each other in a sparring-like situation. It wasn't for television or even for a paying audience. We did a takedown contest out at the ring one afternoon, and everyone was all crazy about seeing us go at each other. But what no one else knows, and what I'm pretty sure Kurt will never admit, is that we really went at it in private one day, and we found out a lot about each other when we collided. It was just me and Kurt in this amateur wrestling room we had found. We were on the road, and we were killing some time. We started doing some drills, and it ended up with us starting to half shoot on each other, and then we started going at it. I handled Kurt with no problems. But by then, Kurt was no longer the Olympic athlete he had once been. He had suffered a lot of injuries in the wrestling ring, and his body was already broken down. So was his will, and that's what I noticed most about Kurt. By the time we were working with each other, he was a broken man. I'm just too big, strong, and skilled for Kurt to handle. He was once a great wrestler, and he had a nice run in the WWE, but he will always fall short when compared with me. Sorry, Kurt. My first WrestleMania. Kurt was hurt going into WrestleMania 2003 in Seattle. He wrenched his neck, and it was determined he needed surgery. Kurt didn't want to take a year off, so he found a surgeon in Pittsburgh who had an alternative that involved shaving down the disc instead of neck fusion surgery the other wrestlers were getting. Kurt also didn't want time off for the standard surgery because he wanted to collect that WrestleMania main event payday. I can't say I blame him for that. I wanted that payday too. Kurt and I talked a little about our match, but we didn't talk about it much. We knew we could bring out the best in each other, and I knew I had to protect Kurt because his neck was hurt. Kurt wasn't going to protect himself because he doesn't know how. He just abused himself. He pushed all the time. Just go, go, go. Even when his body told him to slow down or even stop, Kurt just kept pushing. That's where the Vicodins and other pain pills came into play. John Laurinaitis was going to be the agent for the match. That means he was the choreographer, the guy who had to know what we were going to do so the cameras could follow us and cover the match properly. The agent carries the finish of the match from Vince, and then talks with the wrestlers and gets the entire story of the match together. Then he goes back to Vince and hopes Vince likes it. John wanted to do something special because a lot of corporate eyes were on him, since he was being groomed to take over Jim Ross's job as the head of talent relations. He was now the agent for the biggest match of the year, the main event of WrestleMania, the WWE title on the line between two amateur champions, two real wrestlers with legitimate athletic backgrounds. But apparently, that wasn't enough for John Laurinaitis, because he thought he could score points for himself with a big idea. At lunch that day, John came up to me and pitched his great finish, which would see me hit the shooting star press to beat Kurt for the WWE title. John had this elaborate concept of me kicking out of everything Kurt could hit me with. Then Kurt kicks out of the F5. Since we couldn't beat each other with our best shots, we'd have to dig something out of our bags of tricks. I'd look around, trying to figure out how I could beat Kurt. Then I'd climb to the top rope and hit the shooting star press to pin Kurt Angle and become a two-time WWE Heavyweight Champion. That was John's big finish, for for the biggest match on the biggest show of the year. The only problem was that I hadn't done the move for over a year, and it was very dangerous for both of us. A lot can go wrong when a 300-pound man inward reverse somersaults himself through the air from the top rope, and the margin for error is slim. John, however, was relentless. "Brock, you gotta finish the match like that. It's so memorable. It's your WrestleMania moment." I kept thinking my WrestleMania moment was beating Kurt, just like I'd beaten everyone else, and winning back the title that had been stolen from me at Survivor Series. Wasn't that the story we were telling? I didn't want to do the shooting star. It didn't make any sense to me. To crank up the pressure on me a little more, Jim Ross sat down with us, and John started saying, "Don't you think Brock should finish the match with a shooting star press? It's so impressive, no one has seen him do it. It's such a great move, and no one his size has ever done it before. Blah, blah, blah." JR thinks about that for a moment and drawls, "Hell, kid, that would be one hell of a WrestleMania moment." They had the routine down pat. Finally, stupidly, I agreed to do it. But I at least wanted to practice the move a few times first. I should have listened to my gut and just said no. But like the naive kid I was, I went down to the ring to practice hurling myself from the top rope. John got a hold of some crash mats and piled them in the ring for me so I wouldn't hurt myself during practice. When I went off that top rope and threw myself into a reverse spin, it was actually kind of cool. I nailed the landing perfectly my first time. I tried it again, and I nailed it the second time too. After a few more times, I was really feeling pretty good about it, and we were all thinking it would be no problem when I had to do it at the end of the match. What I didn't consider was that I was going to be working with Kurt for 15 to 18 minutes, and I was probably going to be dead tired and pouring sweat by the time we got around to the finish of the match. That night, Kurt and I put on the best show possible considering the circumstances. We had a really physical match, which wasn't easy when you think about how injured he was. It finally came time to hit the shooting star press, but Kurt and I had been throwing each other off the ropes and working the corners all night long. When I grabbed the top rope to boost myself up, it was all wet. Not good. As I climbed up, I was dripping even more sweat onto the ropes. But I wasn't thinking about that. Everyone at Safeco Field in Seattle knew what was coming, and they were all screaming for me to hit the move and beat Kurt Angle for the championship. There I stood, on the top rope, both arms raised in triumph, my head back, letting the crowd take it all in. And then I launched the shooting star press. Every wrestling fan knows what happened next. My boot slipped off the wet rope, I under-rotated, crashed in spectacular fashion, and gave myself a massive concussion. I damn near broke my neck. I still had enough sense left to know that I had to win, but I don't remember finishing the match. I did finish, which meant I was the champion again, but I sure don't remember it. Not at all. Can you imagine if I had knocked myself out? If that missed move had become the finish? The next morning, I was supposed to do a sponsor appearance, but I couldn't get out of my hotel bed. After I received a few phone calls to rouse me, I finally crawled out and made it down to the appearance. When the sponsors people saw me throwing up from the after effects of the concussion, they sent me back to the hotel. After you play in the Super Bowl or the World Series, you get some time to yourself, or to take your family on a vacation. Not in pro wrestling. You're right back to work the very next day, doing live TV for Raw the first night or taping SmackDown 2 nights after WrestleMania. Kurt made it through the match, and I was lucky to only have suffered a concussion. Kurt went in for the alternative surgery, and I was right back on the road as WWE Champion for the second time. Starting year 2. My first year on the main roster in WWE was a blur. My second year was even worse. I was running into the grind. Same routine every day, day in and day out. The money was great, and I was buying a lot of nice things, but I had no time to enjoy any of it. That touring schedule just eats you up. I just kept thinking that there has to be a better way to make some real money. The one good thing, okay, great thing, that came out of my second year was that I got to meet my future wife, Rena. I think it's pretty common knowledge that I'm a very private man, and there's a reason for that. When I'm on the job, in the ring, at the arena, I'm there to entertain you. I understand that. You paid to see me, and I owe it to you to make sure your money was well spent. But when I'm not on the job, I don't think I owe anything to anybody. If you're a plumber, and you're out to dinner with your family, would you like it if the waiter walked up and said, "Hey, the toilet just backed up, can you come in the back and fix it?" Probably not. You were there to eat, not to fish tampons out of the drain pipe. When I'm enjoying some time with my family, I'm not at work. I'm not on. I'm not there to entertain anyone. I'm a husband and a father. I'm daddy. That's who I am, and all I want to be. So if some jackass wants to pose for pictures with me, it really burns my ass, because he isn't just imposing on me, he is imposing on my wife and my children too. I think everyone should have a right to privacy. Certainly, my family has a right to be left alone. My wife was on TV for a while, so she can expect some of the attention. I get that. But my children aren't performers. What makes them fair game? What gives anyone else the right to take pictures of my children? Why does anyone think it's okay to just walk up to me and act as if I owe them an answer to personal questions? Is it because they bought a ticket or purchased a pay-per-view? I've never been able to grasp that. Why can't I just do my job? If I'm at an event or out promoting something, that's one thing. I expect to take pictures and sign autographs. That's why I'm there. But I deserve a private life too. And so does my family. Over the years, I'm sure that being as private as I am has cost me a lot of money. I could be like one of those media whores that shows up anywhere there might be a camera just to keep my name out there, and to keep my face on the TV and in the papers so the endorsements will keep coming in. But that's not me, and I can live with that. I like to stay home, spend time with my family, and be left alone. My life is my life. It's nobody's business what goes on in my house, or with my wife or my children. I won't intrude on your private life. Don't intrude on mine. That's why, in some ways, the WWE character I actually envied was Kane. He had the greatest gig ever, because he was a big star who wore a mask on TV. When he went home, he'd get to take off the mask and live a normal life. Nobody knew what he looked like, and no one ever bothered him when he went about his personal life. He must have had about as normal a life as you can have in professional wrestling. That's probably why Glenn Jacobs, Kane, survived for so long in WWE. Maybe I should have worn a mask. I might have lasted just a little longer. The grind. When people talk to me about 2003, they talk about my match with Kurt at WrestleMania, my matches with John Cena and Big Show, the Iron Man match, most falls in 60 minutes, I had with Kurt on SmackDown, or me beating Kurt for the title and turning heel again. Financially, that was also my best year in WWE. I was made champion so fast, Vince never even got around to giving me a new contract. I was on the road so much, we never had the time to discuss a new deal. Even by the time I was already a two-time champion, I was still working under the Developmental contract I signed when I was recruited to train in OVW. Finally, we got around to discussing a new contract, and I signed a major deal with WWE on July 1st, 2003. Jim Ross kept telling me I had joined the Millionaires Club faster than anyone else in the history of the business. That may be true, but I'll have to take his word for it because I didn't pay much attention to what the other guys were making. They all lied anyway, so who really knew? I was making a shitload of money, but I just couldn't imagine being on the road for another 15 years or so. I really liked the boys, but I didn't want to be like them. It didn't take me long to figure that out. It's so hard to even imagine being 35 to 40 years old, working matches 4 nights a week in 4 different cities. When those wrestlers get home for a day or two, they are too tired and banged up to do anything. The few who still have families try to give their loved ones a little quality time, but when they arrive at home tired, hurt, and probably hungover, they end up spending the first day just decompressing. Then they use the next day to catch up on the mail, the bills, and chores around the house. Once they've had a night or two in their own beds, they are packed and off to the airport piss early the next morning. Their wives and kids get to see them on TV. So what? That's no substitute for being there. It makes no difference where the plane lands, because all the cities look the same. All the hotel rooms look the same. All the locker rooms, rental car return lots, shuttle buses, they all look the same. You're on autopilot all the time. Then you go home, but before you know it, you're back in the grind, shaking everyone's hands, being careful not to piss anyone off. Vince drills into the guys the notion that they have to believe in their characters if they want the fans to believe in them too. What happens over the years is that some of the guys get so into their characters, they don't know when or how to turn it off. They become their own number one fans. That's how Vince gets so many guys by the balls after a while. The guys will do anything to get their characters over, and if they're lucky enough to get into a good position, they will do anything to keep their characters in the spotlight. It becomes all about Vince. Vince pulls and controls all of the strings. Vince can suggest anything he wants, and as long as he says, "It'll be great for your character," there's a bunch of guys ready and willing to do whatever he says. They are brainwashed, and they don't even know it. Take a shot to the head with a metal folding chair? Great idea. Do a body slam from the top rope onto the concrete outside the ring? Awesome finish. Fall from the top of a 12-foot ladder? That'll get a big pop. Finish the match with a shooting star press? Yeah, I know. Even though I was there only a relatively short time, I wasn't immune to the sell. I was slowly getting sucked in. WWE superstar Brock Lesnar agreed to do the shooting star press finish, not Brock Lesnar, farmer and father. The problem is that when you're in WWE's universe, it becomes very difficult to step out. You can't see in from the outside. You can't take an honest look at yourself and say, "What the hell am I doing?" There is no such thing as normal. In an attempt to keep my sanity and avoid becoming like all the others, I kept telling JR, Laurinaitis, Briscoe, and anyone else who would listen that I needed some time off. That didn't work, so I finally cornered Vince and told him the same thing. You should have seen the look on his face. You would have thought that I stuck a knife in his stomach and twisted it. He acted as if I had committed the ultimate act of betrayal. "I have all this TV time invested in you. The company is counting on you. I told everyone I could rely on you. You can't let me down." Weekend off here and there, but he was never going to let me come off the road for a couple of months. It didn't matter to him if I dropped the title or not. There was just no way he was going to give me that kind of time off. Vince did, of course, have a lot riding on me. But a lot of it was also Vince making sure I didn't step outside of the WWE universe long enough to be able to look back in. If I did, I might see things as they are, and not as he wanted me to see them. It's all about control, and Vince wasn't going to let me have any. The more I work, the more money I generate for Vince through ticket sales, merchandise, DVDs, pay-per-views, and advertising revenue. If it ruins my life, and I end up a zombie like the others, so what? On one of the rare weekends that I did manage to get off, I was sitting at home, and I was trying to figure out why I was so worn down. I felt like an old man, even though I was only 25. The obvious suspects were the injuries that had never had time to heal properly, a lot of empty vodka bottles, the hundreds of pain pills I was swallowing just to get through the tour, and the fact that I was never home and was losing my family connections because of it. I was a professional wrestler, all right. But still, I thought maybe if I didn't have to deal with some of the travel hassles, it might be different. Lines at airport security were getting worse and worse after 9/11, and for a lot of flights, you had to arrive 2 hours early. When you fly every day and you're always tired and beat up, the constant lines and waiting around just wears on you. And it's even worse when you can't walk through an airport without being recognized by hundreds or thousands of people who want pictures and autographs. So I ran the numbers, and I found out it was costing Vince about $175,000 a year to fly me all over the country. The international tours were a different story, but just the domestic travel was somewhere between $150,000 and $175,000. Then it hit me. What if I bought my own plane and avoided all the lines, check-ins, time spent waiting to board, walking through the airport, getting my bags? What if I could just hop on my own plane, go to work, do my job, and get back on my plane and come home? It would be just like driving to work for most people. Yeah, I could do that. So I added up some more numbers, and I figured it out so that I could buy my own plane and actually save Vince money at the same time. One day during a SmackDown taping, I went into Vince's office with my spreadsheets and told him my plan. I showed Vince how he'd actually save money making this deal with me, and maybe I wouldn't need as much time off as I was looking for. Wouldn't you know it? The very next day, the son of a bitch got back to me and said, "Let's do it." By September 2003, I had dropped the title back to Kurt Angle, only to turn heel in order to beat him for the title again. I wasn't even a full year and a half into my run, and I was WWE Champion for the third time. I wasn't a mark for the title, but I was very happy to grab the championship so I could be in more main events. I was already making millions. I had my own plane. The company was counting on me, and I was being reminded of that every day. Then came Miami.
All right, guys, that is the end of part one. That's the conclusion of that. Now we're talking about Death Clutch, my story of determination, domination, and survival. Brock Lesnar with Paul Heyman. This is his book. It was published in 2011. We are talking about currently his first WWE run that ran from 2002 to 2004. Then later on, he had a run with New Japan. And he also later did UFC, and we'll hear about that later on part two, the audiobook. I thank you all guys for coming out to the Red Carpet Ring and also Toxic Ring Scandal. Greatly appreciate it. But stay tuned. We will have a part two to this audiobook. Very, very interesting things to hear about Brock Lesnar. And it will only be more interesting things to hear about Brock Lesnar. I told you guys on Toxic Ring Scandal there was some dirty laundry, and we're really digging into it right now, but we got to close it here. So you guys check out the content on both channels. Check out the links below. You guys already know what it is at this point. It is OVE.